In this video, we're going to talk about learning theory and media design. So to start with, I have this little quote by Nancy DeRate. She wrote a book called Slideology that I highly recommend if you're interested in how to put together better presentations and videos. She said, practice design, not decoration. Don't just make pretty talking points. Okay. She didn't say not to make pretty talking points. She said, don't just make it. Display information in a way that makes complex information clear. That's what we're going to emphasize today, is making that complex information clear. And we're going to do this in two ways. First, we're going to look at learning theory for visual design, what we've actually learned from research into how people learn from visual means. And then we're going to apply those to learning media design principles that are more practical things you can apply when you're creating any type of media. And media can be slides, it can be videos, it can be worksheets, bulletin boards, anything really. Okay, so to start with learning theory, quick preface here. You may know there's a lot of different types of learning theories, overarching paradigms, behaviorism, cognitivism, etc. Most of what I'm going to show today is based on cognitivism. That's when we look at the brain kind of like it's a computer and we have short-term memory and long-term memory. That's because most of the research on media design has focused in cognitivism. If you are coming from a different perspective, you actually might make slightly different decisions about your media design, but I don't have time to get into that in this video. All right, first learning theory, the main one we're going to focus on is cognitive load. Cognitive load comes from a cognitivist perspective, surprise, and it really is based on the idea that we have only so much memory space, only so much working memory in our brains. And so if we overload that working memory, we're going to have some problems. So it talks about intrinsic cognitive load. That's how hard something is by itself. So I might have a very difficult math problem that has a high intrinsic cognitive load, or I might have an easier math problem that does not have a high intrinsic cognitive load. We also have some cognitive load that we add to what we do. So for example, I have this little Creative Commons thing right here that is an extra thing your eye is having to process in your brain. We do these things subconsciously, but whenever we change colors, we change fonts, we have extra information, that all increases cognitive load. And if we increase it too much and we already have high intrinsic cognitive load, we end up overloading our working memory. So cognitive load can be added by things like pictures, words, fonts, color, sounds, off-topic information. These things can be used effectively for clarifying things, and if the material itself isn't too hard to begin with, then it's not as big of a deal to add extra colors or things like that. But if you're focusing on a very hard topic, it's important to not have extra cognitive load. Here's some other things about cognitive load. Here's some other causes outside of just the media itself. If we have a bad mood, we don't learn as well. If things are inconsistent, our brain keeps having to adjust to new fonts and new colors and things in different places. The display is confusing, or if we're just not ready for the material, or we can't quite access what we remember from before. Consequences is it feels bad is the main thing. It feels like hard work. It feels unfamiliar or untrue because our brain is having to work so hard. So this means that when we're designing media for learning, we want to make it as clear, simple, and pleasant as possible. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, a little bit about grouping or clustering ideas. You might have done some memory tests where they tell you to remember a whole bunch of words, and it's hard to do. But then if you group the words together, it makes it a lot easier. Or you might have had your students create mind maps where they're able to group different ideas and words together to help them clarify the structure in their brains. This is grouping or clustering ideas, and there's quite a bit of research on it that it's a good thing to do. It can help memory and increase understanding. We can cluster by putting things into distinct groups. So here's colors, here's trees, here's flowers. We can create a hierarchy where some things are main ideas and some are details. We can go across time, or we can group similar ideas. But whenever we can group things together, it helps us understand and remember better. Another piece of learning theory that helps is accessing prior knowledge. So if you were taught to do a lesson plan, you might have been told in the beginning to review something or just access what was relevant to what was going to happen. We can do that visually as well. So even using little icons or images like this helps you connect what you already know to what we're presenting. We can do that with words, pictures, all kinds of things. Connecting to personal identity. So whenever we can connect what we're learning to the learner's identity, they will be more engaged and remember better. So if we can use images that connect to personal identity, the identity of the students, colors, the language, that will also increase learning. And finally, just having a more positive learner experience, again, is going to increase the learning effectiveness. Okay, so those are some ideas from learning theory. Now we're going to apply them to learning media design. Okay, we're going to start with this idea of contrast. So if you look at these charts, some of these are easier to read than others. We have good contrast and bad contrast. This one is bad because it has what we call a vibration, where it kind of looks fuzzy because it's such a strong contrast. I'm not exactly sure what makes it other than it looks fuzzy. This one is just not enough contrast. If we have a dark background, we need to use a light text. That will make it easiest to see. If we have a light background, we use a dark text. This is important because if our brain is spending time trying to read something because it's not clear, that's going to increase extrinsic cognitive load. And we don't want to do that. So we want to make it as clear as possible, and that means having contrast in the colors, not using those ones. We can also use contrast to group ideas. So consider the difference between this and that, right? By changing the contrasting colors, I'm actually grouping them in different ways, and it makes us think about it in different ways. Here's some professional examples of contrast. You can just see how things pop out so well. Proximity has to do with the spatial distance between things. So I can take my nice star and smiley faces here. If I move them closer together, they become more related. And if I move these apart, they even become more related because they're farther apart from each other. But what if I do this? Now we're starting to group this idea and this idea. So the proximity of things affects how we interpret it, how we group it in our head. So here are some bad examples. Right here, this school is too close to the word quit. So the proximity made us connect school and quit, which is not good. This one's funny because suicide and event are just too close. They tried to put a line here, it looks like, to try to differentiate, but it's still too close. And here too, they tried to put save a life in a different color, so it's not like don't save a life. But the proximity is so close that the color doesn't quite do enough to differentiate it. Here's a student example. Whenever we have pictures and captions, we want to put them next to each other to keep those ideas related. All right, repetition. You might have noticed that I tend to use the same colors and slide layouts in my lectures. I usually create a template for each class because that, again, is going to decrease cognitive load because certain things are repeating and your brain doesn't have to process them each time. Here's some professional examples. They have different colors, but they keep consistent shape between the menu and the advertisement and whatever that is. When you're creating learning materials, especially websites or slides, what's important here is to keep consistent fonts and consistent colors and even placement of things. Because again, we're trying to decrease any extra information the brain has to understand or contemplate. All right, comprehend is the word I'm looking for. All right, alignment. Alignment is just how things are in relationship to each other, like this way. Okay. And I'm most concerned about alignment with text. So here's different types of text alignment. Up here is left alignment, where the hard line is on the left. And then center, right alignment, it's hard on the right, and then justified, it's a hard line on both sides. Now in left alignment, what happens is I'm reading across and I get to the end of the line and then I go back to the beginning of the next line, right? And then I go back to the beginning of the next line. My eyes always go back to the beginning. It's very consistent and it has good repetition. If I'm reading something that's centered, my eyes go to the end, and then I have to find the beginning of the next line. Now, it's not like it takes a long time, but it's subconsciously, it's a little bit of extra processing the brain has to do. So centering is good for hierarchy, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But if you're going to have longer blocks of text, do not center them. Okay, at most have 2 lines centered. Anything after that, it needs to be left aligned. Right aligned, same problem. I get to the end of the line, I have to find the next beginning, and that can add cognitive load. Justified, the problem with justified is you end up with some spaces that are bigger than others, and that inconsistency can disrupt learning a little bit. So there you go. That is alignment. Hierarchy is how goes along with clustering, where we're trying to understand how things are related to each other, and we can do that spatially. So in our society, we usually indent to have something be a sub piece of something else. So right now, the smiley faces are subtopics from the stars, but we can switch that by aligning, and that changes the hierarchy. Here's some professional examples, especially this middle one. It's really easy to make sense of this visually. I can glance at this and I can see menu, mains, sides, drinks. Just really easily understand the structure of this and how these pieces are working together. Here's a student example. We have a heading, subheading, text. We want to have good contrast between those so people know how to comprehend each part of it. Then finally, white space. White space is just leaving space. You don't have to fill every bit of it. If there's not a reason to have something there, don't put it there. And you can actually use white space in an active way to guide the eye a little bit down the page. It improves website design, readability, and organization. I like this quote: "The perfection is not achieved when there's nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away." And I was thinking about this in relationship to when I used to teach orchestra. And here, this is the textbook that I used, the method book I used. It's pretty fun. It has lots of colors. But you can see there might be a little too many colors here. Why do we have to have tips in a different color than fingers? Why do we have to have bow in a different color? Why do we have to have all these little lines up here? Now, I know they're referencing information, but learning music is really hard for students in the beginning. And so that extra stuff might not be effective. We also have this map up here. It's kind of like we don't want to have any white space, so we're going to put something in there. Versus this page, which they only add what they need. You know, I can't see things here that I would recommend taking away. It's all important for it. And then it leaves a little more breathing room. Now, I think this is more engaging. And if I taught orchestra again, I probably would still use this, not just because it's more engaging, but because of other things about how it teaches that I really like. But it is something to consider. If I were to design this, I would definitely simplify these pages. Okay, those are learning media design principles. Let me show you a couple examples with text to bring this together. We've got a list of words. If you look at the content, you could probably group them, but let's say that you didn't know what those words are. Well, we can change the proximity to group them in different ways. We can also add some content to create some hierarchy where we have the name of the animals and the names of the trees. Now, if you didn't know what these were, it wouldn't be as clear whether trees went with this group or with this group. So when we put labels and topics on, we want to move this so that we have a space before a topic, not after, so that these items can stay with trees and these can stay with animals. To create hierarchy, one thing we can do is indent things. We don't have to, there's other ways, but that's one way. We can change the font. Here I just added an underline, but you can bold, you can change the font, and that tells me that these are categories and these are details. I can also change the color, and that can help with hierarchy. But don't do this. This is not what you want to do. That's going to overload. There's no reason to change the fonts and colors there. Okay, now I just want to briefly talk a little bit about creating videos or even just regular presentations to students. We all know this problem where people just get up there and they just read the slides. And it's like, why do we need someone to read slides to us? Whenever you create something that has slides or other visual elements with audio or voice, be clear about the purpose of each. So the slide is going to probably offer some visual clarity and some enrichment, like I'm grouping these words under a slide image. Whereas the words you say are going to support explanation, conversation, and dialogue, kind of like this symbol here I have to try to show the difference between what we're going to have in each space. Now, there are times these days when you create slides that aren't meant for presenting. They're more something you're going to email to someone to explain something. I like to call these slide-uments. I'm not sure where I got that, but slide-uments. In this case, more text is fine because the people are going to be reading it. But take advantage of the slide layout, and you can think of it as kind of like magazine pages. And then when you do share these type of things, make sure you share them as PDFs. All right, another reading slide comic. There's a lot of those out there. Okay, remember this? See if it makes more sense now. We're practicing design. We're deciding where to put things based on what we want people to group and remember and such, not decoration. We're not just making pretty talking points. We're trying to display information to make it complex, make complex information clear. All right? Now, to contradict what I just said, I'm going to now read the takeaways because it's okay sometimes to read things. All right. So visual design principles, they're supported by learning science. Those first learning theory principles we talked about in the beginning, like cognitive load. You can impact how others interpret media through the design, which elements you put together, what colors you use. Keep your designs clear and simple to best support learning. All right. Thanks for watching.